Some stories don't get an ending. They just get left behind. This is Unsolved, from 47 Tabs. In 1981, in a cabin in the mountains of Northern California, 4 people were killed in a single night. A few feet away, children slept through it. The killers walked past their room, and 40 years later, no one can prove why. It was a bright spring morning, ordinary in every way that mattered until Sheila opened the door. A 14-year-old girl coming home from a sleepover next door, back to change her clothes for church. She stepped up onto the porch. She opened the door of cabin 28, and what she saw sent her running back across the gravel. Inside, 3 people were dead. A 4th was missing. A 12-year-old girl simply gone. She would not be found for 3 years. But in the next room, behind a single thin wall, 3 children had slept through the night. Unharmed, the killers had walked right past them and left them alive. Decades later, some of the people who returned to this case believed the answer was hiding in the one part of the crime that made the least sense. By the end, that unanswered question may look different. Before cabin 28 became a crime scene, it was supposed to be the place Sue Sharp finally got away. In 1979, Glenna Sharp, everyone called her Sue, made a decision that took real courage. Accounts of her life describe a troubled and allegedly violent marriage. She gathered her 5 children, and she drove west, all the way to California, to start over near her brother. By that autumn, the family had found a place to land, a quiet mountain town called Keddie. Once, Keddie had been a resort. Cabins tucked in the pines, a stream for fishing, and a warm lodge glowing at the end of the road. But those days were long gone. The paint was peeling now. The cabins had gone soft with rot and were rented out cheap to families who didn't have anywhere else to go. Sue and her children moved into house number 28. It should have been a fresh start. For a while, maybe it even was. On the night of April 11th, 7 people were under that roof. Sue, her 15-year-old son John, John's 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate, Sue's 12-year-old daughter Tina, and 3 younger children asleep in a back bedroom, 2 of Sue's youngest boys and a 12-year-old neighbor who had come to stay the night. Remember those 3 children in the back room. Before this is over, one of them will sit closer to the heart of this case than anyone could have guessed. The next morning belonged to Sheila, Sue's 14-year-old daughter. She'd spent the night at a sleepover in the cabin next door, and now she was coming home to change for church. She crossed the gravel, climbed the steps, and opened the door to cabin 28. What she saw there, we are not going to describe. Some things should be left at the threshold. Sheila ran, screaming, back the way she came. A neighbor sprinted to the lodge, and the lodge called the police. When officers arrived, they found Sue Sharp dead at 36. Her son John was 15. His friend Dana Wingate was 17. They had been bound. The scene showed signs of a prolonged and violent attack, so violent that the alert police later sent out hospitals to watch for anyone arriving with knife wounds. They believed whoever did this may have injured himself that night, and yet, in the back bedroom, just a few feet away, the officers found 3 small children, the 2 youngest Sharp boys and the neighbor's son, all of them alive. They had been only a few feet from it. How much they heard, saw, or understood would become one of the case's unresolved questions. Why? Why spare them? Hold on to that question. This whole case turns on it. Then the horror changed shape, because one child who should have been in that cabin was not there at all. Tina Sharp was gone. The mountains came alive with the search. Dogs, volunteers, helicopters. An alert went out across county lines all the way to the Nevada border. But there was no sign of her, not that day, not that week, not that year. And here is where the investigators who came back to this case decades later will stop you, because they came to believe Tina's disappearance was not a side detail. It may have been central to understanding the whole crime. One of them put it plainly. You don't kill 3 people and leave them to be found, and then carry the youngest girl off into the dark, unless, in the killer's mind, she represented a risk the others did not. 3 years later, Tina would be found. But the discovery would raise more questions than it answered. This case had survivors in the next room, a missing child, a possible witness, and physical evidence at the scene, and somehow, almost every lead that should have mattered began to slip away. And here is where those 3 children come back. Because one of the kids from that back room, was the closest thing this case had to a witness. He described 2 men, and investigators tried to turn that memory into sketches. That should have been a careful process handled by an expert. Instead, the drawings were made locally by someone without forensic artist training, even though state and federal resources were available. The one lead that might have focused the entire search, coming from a child who had been feet from the killing, was quietly wasted. Then, just 3 months in, the lead investigator left the case for a job with the state. Years later, one of Sue's daughters would say something that has haunted this case ever since. That she was told the suspects had been quietly told to leave town. To her, it felt like a cover-up. That allegation has never been resolved in court. Now, up to this point, the story points one direction: a remote cabin, a family new to town, 2 faces in a crude sketch. It looks like the nightmare every parent lies awake fearing, that someone came in from the dark woods and vanished back into them. Except the people who know this case best don't think it was a stranger at all. April 1984, 3 years after the murders. A man was out in the woods of Butte County, dozens of miles from Keddie, collecting bottles. And in the underbrush, far from any road, he found something that didn't belong there. Human remains. A piece of a skull. Part of a jaw. They belonged to Tina Sharp. And what happened next made the discovery even harder to explain. Shortly after the news broke, the phone rang. An anonymous caller. A voice that pointed investigators back toward Keddie and asked if anyone had tied these remains to the little girl who had vanished 3 years before. Whoever made that call knew to link the two before the public ever did. Investigators would later see it as a lead that deserved far more attention than it got. Because that call was never properly logged, the recording was dropped into an evidence box and forgotten. It would sit there, in the dark, for nearly 30 years before anyone found it again. Someone reached out to point at the truth, and the people who were supposed to be chasing it let the tape go cold. So who did the people closest to this case come to fear? A name surfaces again and again, a man who lived just 2 cabins away. Now let's be careful here, because this case is unsolved, and no one was ever charged. Everything you are about to hear is suspicion, a theory built by investigators who spent decades of their lives inside this file and could never quite close it. The man lived nearby with his wife and her sons, and just days before the murders, a friend of his had moved in with them. The theory centers on Sue as a possible target, with the others killed because they were present or because they could identify whoever was responsible. And then there is the letter. After the murders, the man left Keddie and drove to Reno, and from there he wrote to his wife. In that letter was a line investigators would come to focus on. It read, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." That letter was handed to the sheriff's department, and like the tape in the evidence box, it was set aside, overlooked. There is more. A counselor later claimed the man admitted involvement in Sue and Tina's deaths. According to that account, Tina was killed because she had seen too much. But the claim was never tested in court, and no one was ever convicted, because this case keeps running into the same wall. The man died of cancer years later. He was never charged. He was never tried. And now, he can never be asked. And still, after all of it, the case will not close. In 2013, it was reopened. New detectives, new science, new DNA, and at one point, 6 living people still of interest. In 2016, a hammer was pulled from a pond near Keddie. It reportedly matched the description of one a person of interest had said was missing around the time of the murders. Evidence kept surfacing slowly, decades after it might have mattered most. Think about where we started. 3 children asleep behind a thin wall while 4 people were killed just feet away. And for reasons no one has ever proven, they were allowed to live. 40 years later, we still cannot say for certain who walked past that door. Here is what we keep coming back to on this channel. Fiction gives you a reason, a shape, an ending. A killer in a mask, a motive you can say in a single sentence, and then the credits roll, and you get to feel safe again. Keddie left the people who love Sue, John, Dana, and Tina with something much harder, an unfinished record, and a question no one has been able to prove. Who walked past that bedroom door? And why did those children live? That's the space we sit in here. The distance between the version that lets you sleep and the one that actually happened.